Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the final two sessions of today. Kindly, before we start, could we just please ask that any conversations happening at the back of the room are please kept to an absolute minimum, just so that we don't disturb the panelists or the audience in the front. So any conversations, please, at the back of the room, to absolute minimum, please. Much appreciated. Thank you. Okay, so to the next session. The outcomes benchmark will begin shortly now. So please welcome to the stage Marco Limandri, Guy Halamish, Dan German, and your moderator for this session, Alexandra Mousavizadeh.
Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you. I feel that we are the penultimate session that's keeping you from your cocktails. But I'm really particularly excited about this session because, full disclosure, you may have heard us talk about at Evident that we are in the process of building a private outcomes benchmark. So here's really my chance to grill everyone on what that should look like and get feedback. But Manuela says it's the wrong question to ask. She just told me, actually, what we should be looking at, what is the impact? Let's look at the outcomes from the customer perspective. So I'm actually going to start this slightly different than I had planned, which is to say, is it the right question to ask? In any event, whether it is or it isn't, what is the framework that you are currently using? And I'm going to hand it to Guy first to hear your reflections from JP Morgan, what you're working on, but whether the question is the right one, and what is your framework?
I don't know if there is right questions or not. It depends about the answer that you give. So just probably 30 seconds on what actually I do in JP Morgan to give you a little bit of context. So a couple of years ago, we thought that today's problems are very, very complex, and so is the future, and not one discipline can actually transform the bank to the future. So we put all data, technology, operation, AI together in one group. So the group that I lead is a group of around 50,000 people across the investment bank. So we talk about the big scale. And when we talk about impact and we talk about how to do AI, we never think about AI just as AI. We think about how we're transforming our businesses enabled by AI. And when you think about the measurement itself, is really taking all the assets that we have, and assets are technology, talent, businesses, processes, and how we align all of those investments into where we see the most benefit. And then the question is, how do you measure benefit? But I'm sure we'll get into it later, and there is a framework, there is discipline, there is governance, and we do it across the entire firm.
Thank you. I wanted to send that same question on maybe Dan, and thank you so much for coming up all the way from Australia to London. We're really thrilled to have you here also. I might just add to that question, sort of some of the ways that we've been thinking about this question of measurement of success and the structure of mapping mapping the use cases. And then we've got three categories: mapping the use cases, looking at what your selection criteria are, and then that monitoring of that success, actually the ROI. So that's, of course, sort of some of the ways that we've been looking at it. But just sort of handing that question to you as well about how are you, when you assess, what is the framework that you're using in the bank?
Sure. And thanks for having me. I know some of the team in Australia were watching the live stream earlier. If you're still there, g'day, and go to bed. Maybe I can answer your question in part by explaining my weird title, which is Chief Decision Scientist. We're obsessed with the customer and outcomes, and actually outcomes is the thing that excites us most about benchmarks like this. How can we deliver better outcomes? I started working at Combank about 7 years ago now, and one of the things that we did in the early days with AI was work out customers were using a private ATM, so these are things in shops or in pubs, where it costs you money to draw your own money out from private vendors of those ATMs when it's free from the major banks. And we did some AI models to work out who was doing this and why and when. And through the Command Gap, created messaging that would say, we did a little experiment, say, did you know, over the course of the last month, you spent $100 taking out your money, there are cash machines here, here, and here. Maybe just think about that. And we found something surprising, which is that for many customers, including those who most really couldn't afford to do that, as a result of us doing that, the amount went up. The amount that they were spending on private ATMs went up as a result of that. This was depressing for us as an AI team trying to help customers. Luckily, my behavioral science team came along and said, Dan, you idiot, what are you doing? People don't like being told what to do, least of all by a bank. And it turns out that's what people were doing. They were railing against the instructions. And so by combining behavioral science with data science, we're able to reframe the messaging, think about how and when to communicate with people, when not to communicate with people, measure the outcomes. If you're having an adverse outcome, don't do it. And so that really is a kind of a framework that exists today in how we think about the way that we prioritize use cases. What's the outcome that you're driving? Is it what you intend? How can you show that? How can you do more of that? And how can you really focus on customer outcomes above all else?
Can I just follow up with a question to that? When we're talking about outcomes, there's lots of things that go into that. And you talked about there's the quantitative way of assessing it, but there are other things that might be captured in the way that you think about short-term, long-term impact outcomes. How do you assess outcomes?
I think, it's really interesting. And perhaps going back to Manuela's point about is ROI the right way to be thinking about this? AI has caused us to change our thinking about this. So ROI, traditionally, there's a bunch of bankers in the room who are very well aware that, on the one hand, it costs this much to do. On the other hand, it's like, it saves this much or it generates this much. And if one number is bigger than the other, off you go. AI is different insofar as it's rapidly evolving, and the fact that the NVIDIAs and other companies of the world are progressing so well and are being valued so high indicates that we all think that there will be tremendous increased value over time and that will continue to grow. And so that means that as we're thinking about use cases, as well as thinking about the ROI and always thinking about the customer, a slightly different lens on what will be valuable to the bank in a broader sense. I'll give you an example from generative AI. So in one of the early kind of generative AI pieces we were doing, and a lot of banks will be doing this, it's around RAG, retrieval augmented generation, right? So it's like you've got a knowledge base, and has a lot of information, it takes a while to search it, and you want to make that easier through a conversational interface. And I remember some senior member of the bank who I admire very much and is very good. He said, Dan, all of my experience in the world here says, pick a use case, a specific one, do it really well with a lot of people, that's the way to get there. And ordinarily, of course, that's right, and he's a very smart guy and very successful, and I admire him a lot. But in this instance, I sort of had a sense that there's so little we know about this. If we experiment in a safe way, in multiple different ways, we'll learn things very quickly that will pay off dramatically in the long run, because we don't know yet the best way to do this use case. I know that I can do it in a way that will drive ROI right now, but if you just give us a little bit of time to think about that, we can drive a lot more. And what we found was we were able to run parallel examples of that use case in teams that had different ways of storing the information. Some had PDFs, some had SharePoint websites, some had other things. And we found a dramatic increase in the usability and the usefulness of the responses if the text that was in the knowledge base was formatted in a very specific way. Now, to the user that they were designed for, they look more or less identical. And then it turns out that actually, if we were to think about the way that we store knowledge for people who use standard operating procedures and so forth, the way that we used to think about things was, will this be best for the end user to read simply and be able to serve the customer? Now what we learn is we should be designing to make it easier for the AI that is helping the member of staff to help the customer, because that produces the better outcomes. So we learned very quickly about some of the better structures and better ways of thinking about our unstructured data and our vector databases and those things in a way that we wouldn't previously have if we had just thought about the short-term ROI.
Interesting. We'll come back to that. Marco, I'm going to hand the same question to you because, different location, different history at ING, and you would love to hear sort of how are you tackling, what frameworks you're using, and how do you think about the outcomes and the ROI? aspect and measurement?
Sure. So as a context, I'm part of ING Analytics. It's a global team. And we build every AI product and technology for the entire group, all the countries, all the businesses. So I think to your first question, the first part is about ambition. So I always say to our teams this example. If you look at the invention of personal computer in the 70s, what every company did, gave a personal computer to everyone, every employee, spent billions. But then if you look at the overall productivity of employee, 20 years after that, it was flat. There was no change. And why is that? There are many theories, but the one I like is that we actually never changed the process for 20 years after the adoption of personal computing. And if you think about how you book a trip, right? You used to go to a travel agency. Before computing, they would show you a catalog on paper. And after the invention of computing, it would be the same process, just on a computer. And it took 20 years for someone to say, hey, we can invent something like booking and totally re-engineer the process. And I think we are facing a bit the same with AI right now. So all the people in this room are somehow responsible to make sure we don't do the same. So a lot of investment, AI everywhere, but then no value captured. So that's, I think, where we set the ambition to our teams. We are not in the business to deliver models and embedding in the business. We are re-engineering processes and domains, so we need to come up with a vision about that. How do we do it concretely? So I think a few years ago, we adopted, for more the operation side of things, this KPI, we call it STP, it means straight to processing. So ING is a great ambition for customer experience, right? Making every process frictionless. And basically how it works is a customer starts an interaction with us. If that interaction, wherever it is, asking a loan or whatever, it's fully digital, that KPI is 1. If there is even a tiny, tiny part of that interaction that is not automated, so there's some human here and there, something goes wrong, that's 0. It's a very clear KPI. I think you don't want to have it in your performance evaluation. But anyhow, it's very helpful because we can link AI to that. So we can say our AI contribute to the digitalization of the process. And this KPI is shared among the entire bank. We communicate it to investor. We set an ambition. I think yesterday we communicated 70% across all our banking process. And that's, I think, a practical way of how we operationalize.
70% is what, sorry? 70%?
If you look at the key core banking processes, so giving a loan to customer, there are 60 of these processes. 70% is the average degree of digitalization. So
right.
fully
So is that full straight through?
Fully straight through.
Okay.
So,
interesting.
yeah.
How does that look at JP Morgan?
You know, we have many, many businesses, but this wouldn't be a good example. If we were in 70%, it would have been a big worry for us. We're running big scale businesses. So for example, just on our payment platform, we'll run something like $10 trillion a day. And it's probably 99% STP. So this 1% is still enormous amount of manual work that people need to do in order to reconcile, in order to reduce fraud, in order to identify who is on sanction list or not, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a lot of manual work that otherwise need to happen. So you want the STP to be as high as possible on big scale, and this is across all our processes. When we think about success, so we spread I'd say there are 4 big things. First of all, you want to have a culture in the organization that incorporate AI in every decision. So when you think about your processes and you're reimagining the process, you know that you have technology, you have operation, you have relocation, whatever, but you have also AI capabilities in the team to help you to accelerate your transformation. So the culture piece is extremely important. The second one, you have to ask, if I'm successful, then what? And a lot of time I get hundreds of use cases that even if the person is successful automating this mailbox or the other, I don't know, we save 4 people here, or the customer satisfaction may or may not happen, and so it has to be substantial in order to pass the threshold. So we spread very, very thin and wide the book of work, but then we identify those areas that work and have meaningful impact, and we close the rest. So the selection is extremely important. The third one is having the ability to measure progress and measure what matters. So you have to have a benchmark. You know where you started. You started with 80% accuracy, and are you improving to 90, 95? And a lot of times, you know, even when you go in one of our processes, for example, to 95% accuracy using AI, you'll have our operator calling and saying, no, this is wrong. obviously focusing on the last 5%, but when you compare before, when only human did it, it was only 80% accurate. So there is, again, the point of changing processes and adoption, but measuring what matter is extremely important. And the last one is the discipline of having the entire group reviewing, understanding, reuse capabilities, embedding in our businesses, etc. So we run through this. I mentioned quite a lot in operation. I think one of the big things for us is how you scale all of this. So how you abstract a lot of those processes across JP Morgan. So one of the things we've done is collaboration between the investment bank and CCB, the retail side, across the firm. So we have something like 80,000 people in operation. And Mike Ashworth and I co-lead this effort. We call it AI for Operation. And we have people from our groups, from Samina to Manuela to many people in this room and being part of it, walking through what are those processes that will be scaled across all operations. Documentation is one of them. It doesn't matter if you do lending, you use documentation. If you do tax submission, you use documentation. If you do sales and ISDA and GMRA, you do KYC. So how you automate the process, how you incorporate AI for data arbitration, for pre-population of template, increasing customer satisfaction. But every aspect has to be measured. But again, the point is how you deploy it at scale and transform those businesses. I think the reimagining of processes is extremely important. If you have, I don't know, process with maker checker, if the maker is the machine and the checker is human, you already change the entire process and increase client satisfaction and increase speed and et cetera, et cetera. So
I'd really like to get to the point, the last point about how you get to that scale. What are the levers that you pull? But before that, just to go back to the point 2, which is the selection process. How, and your point first was culture, second was you're successful, then what happens? But the selection of, use cases that have been successful in their pilot and you're deciding which ones to go with. What matrix, what goes into that decision making?
The best people, in my view, to make this determination is the business people. The people who run the business, and it doesn't matter if it's the equity head or rates or operation or technology, the actual head of functions. So it's not that someone sits out there in an AI team and decide the best thing for us to do today is to automate those mailboxes or to optimize this balance sheet or to get this liquidity outcome or to have that's not the way it works.
So if Manuela wants her emails to be written by the AI, you're going to say that is...
Manuela can do whatever she wants and fully support it. That's amazing. But when Manuela wants to have impact for the businesses, Manuela or Lydia or Teresa, we have amazing, so the structure in JP Morgan is we have embedded teams in the businesses. So each business head, it can be the head of operation markets or the head of equity, we'll have an embedded team in the businesses. The second is you have apply team that sits centrally and does core capabilities for everyone in JP Morgan to use. And then you have AI research, again, for the firm to use. And normally you use the AI research to think about things that you know you have a problem today, but not with current techniques. Can you think about a new way to resolve it? And you deploy and they do an amazing job. And then you have apply team that help you with current techniques on current problem, and then you have the embedded teams who actually work in the businesses and help to know, I need this capability, I need this capabilities, et cetera, in order to accelerate the transformation. But the decision making, again, the best people to do it is the people who run the businesses. Because they know what is the last leg, what is the thing that they need to do in order to have the efficiency, the growth, the client satisfaction. So that's a big change that we made, by the way. So a few years ago, it's maturity curve. So each organization will be in a different maturity level at any given time. So I've been working with this probably for 10 years, and in the last 5 years, we have accelerated it very much. So in part with people like Manuela, who joined our management teams and start to ask questions, very intriguing questions. So when you write a code, the first thing that you do is you ask, can AI resolve? And if the answer is no, cross bucket, you move on. But every so often, you start to have new models incorporated. So fetch this information, action this, do that. So now you start to have AI models embedded in your production. As you move with your mature model, you don't need any more central team and the control to be very much centralized, you start to embed them in the team and let the business start to operate. You still want to have coordination. You still have to have the Teresa run major platforms, major governance, benefit tracking, which business case works, so you can learn across the organization. So there is the read across. But this decision making, again, it's starting from the business. If successful, what? And it has to be big impact. You put all the resources on this, and you have the measure what matter ongoing in order to see whether you deviate from your expected outcome. Sometimes you exceed, sometimes not. And when you're not, you need to pivot. And when you exceed, you need to accelerate even further.
So just, I would love to get back to Dan on the question of scale as well. But if we could just continue, could you talk a little bit about, because that was on, measuring the impact, where the decision lies in the lines of business. They're the best to assess that. But on the question of, so it goes from, it becomes embedded, but how do you so what are the levers that you pull to scale it though? Because one thing is that if the decisions are made at the line of business, do you run a risk of duplication? If you want to scale, do you need to lift it up so it's also visible in the central part of the bank to scale? Or what are the components of scale?
You have to optimize what you are: speed, scale, control, etc. So one of the things I mentioned on operations. So generally we have in the CIB 5 big operation teams. It can be markets, it can be security services, it can be payment, it can be also lending, it can be banking, it can be various operations. And you would assume from very far that all operations do exactly the same, meaning all of those things which are not straight-through processing. And if the straight-through processing is so high, why do you need tens of thousands of people doing operation? So the last mile is very different for each of those processes. So in order to actually incorporate AI, you have to reimagine the process. So how do you capture document? How you extract document? And if you do it in payment, for example, checks, is different to if you do it in operation for markets and you're capturing contracts with clients. So each of those things is different. But when you abstract it, it all looks the same. You capture, you process, you extract, you populate. So we're trying, again, to find those things that we can actually accelerate. Documentation will be one of them. Voice will be another. And this is how you accelerate. Then you get all the SMEs on this particular domain in order to accelerate the platforms. Dan, in a way, I think what would be, do you want to comment on Guy's framework in terms of both the impact measurement, but also the way to scale? And how does that look back like at CBA?
Yeah, I'll maybe put an asterisk on Guy's assertion that the best way to do this is through the business, choose the use cases. And I think that's right almost all the time. And maybe a way to think about this, and when it is true, and some other ways of thinking about outcomes, is to kind of bucket into 4 types. And we talked about how AI kind of really causes us to think differently about what good outcomes are. And so the first and the most obvious is, the first one that I talked about previously. It's like what comes in, what comes out. We've been doing AI for a long time, and through our customer engagement engine, for example, we have more than 1,000 machine learning models, over 157 billion data points to think about lots of different ways to talk about things to our customers. We have 400 at least different things we can talk to customers about, many different ways to have that. Each one of those has a kind of control group, and so you can measure very quickly and in a very sort of rapid feedback framework what works and what doesn't. Through being able to empower our people, our data and analytics professionals with access to very high-end auto ML capability, so our H2O partnership, for example, suddenly we have people who previously couldn't have done the work that we did to set that up, to work on individual conversations and uplift those. One of them, our Benefits Finder tool, allows our customers to see state and federal benefits and other rebates that they might be entitled to. Australia is a kind of very geographically diverse country. It can be quite hard to know what you're entitled to. We use AI to make that better. But the people who are in charge of that tool, who weren't necessarily data scientists, were able to apply much better predictive modeling and drive a much bigger output from that. And actually now we've returned more than $1 billion worth of money that people were entitled to from the government for our customers into their pockets. So that's one way to go at scale. The kind of asterisk comes in the sort of three other buckets of thinking about outcomes and ROI in a slightly more nuanced way. The first would be those types of use case where you know there's value in it, but measuring the value is not impossible, but very, very complex. I'll give you an example. In COVID, within about 24 hours of really knowing that this is going to be a thing, we'd spun up 6,000 machine learning models for every sector and geography within Australia to understand what we would predict to normally happen with transaction patterns and what was actually going to happen. And that allowed us to see very, very quickly which parts of the economy were going to be affected, which of our customers and where were going to be affected, who was going to spend less on what. Allowed us to react really quickly and allowed us also then to react very quickly in terms of, realizing this is going to be a tough time for people in certain industries. You have to look at our home lending. And so holidays for repayments and things like that were informed by that, as were many other things about our operations. That's incredibly valuable. Mm-hmm. Now, I could put all of my data scientists on working on exactly how valuable that was, but I think we just intuitively know that this is a good and valuable thing for the bank, and it's better to do more of that than to use a lot of horsepower in driving that. The third one is a bit like the one that I talked about in terms of the structure of documents in generative AI. Another one might be the democratization of feature stores, where you are developing capability that has long-term strategic value in a way that will compound over time, but might not necessarily be something that individual lines of business are incentivized to fund and create themselves. It may be that our credit risk teams, thinking about lending, might have a very predictive variable, which is, I don't know, the number of times you spent X on Y over the last 3 years. And then it may be that that proves to be very predictive. Our capital model teams want to do the same thing, but over 7 years, by investing in a feature store, being able to democratize which features work well or not in certain circumstances, and making it really, really easy to reuse them in other circumstances, means that we return much better outcomes across lots of different parameters that we might not otherwise have thought about. So there's another way to think about scale, building capability that empowers people to deliver things that they never previously would have been able to. The bank is greater than the sum of its parts. And maybe the fourth, most controversial, is where it doesn't return any obvious money on investment at all. And again, room of bankers wondering what the hell are you talking about, Dan? One of the things that we discovered was through our payments capability in the app. You send somebody some money to say, I'll pay you back for coffee, and you can write a little message in there. Unfortunately, we found that some customers, and this is true, I think, on most of these payment platforms across the world, use this as a means of communication, sometimes abusive communication. Sometimes people swear. Sometimes people send messages that you don't want to hear. And so we're able to use, in the first instance, AI to look at toxicity of the sentiment and swear words and things like that. But it turns out some of the worst stuff doesn't use swearing at all, and it can be very invidious and abusive and terrible for people to be subject to that. And so AI was able to help us effectively identify where this was happening through looking at a combination of graph neural networks for transaction patterns, what looks unusual, aligning that to the text itself, and able to really attack this. We actually open sourced the way that we did this and published the research on it, so that, a little plug there for all the other banks to please feel free to talk to me about that afterwards and use that. Now, I don't know what the ROI is on that, and I couldn't care less. I mean, it's just, if we're going to talk about trust in AI, and we're going to encourage people to think about AI is going to produce a better future, then I think it's incumbent on us to also think about those use cases where, as large institutions with large amounts of data, we have an opportunity to do things like that that have never been possible before.
That's super interesting. The value is clear, but how you measure it is not. But and I'd like to go to you, Marco. I have a specific question, but I just wanted to, after that, go to the room for questions before it's too late. But Marco, obviously to sort of also hear your thoughts on this sort of scalability question, but there is this other question, I think, that is here, which is around this sort of time to production question. And the time to production is obviously something one focuses on because, you want to be nimble, oncoming, innovations, to be able to adopt them at speed and making sure one's organization is as nimble as possible to get that time to production down. But does that conflict with a long-term view of value creation when we're looking at maybe agentic AI or things like that, where you actually do need to spend time to think about what that might mean and what does that, how do we need to position ourselves and be prepared for that? How do you think about time to production?
Like, it's not conflicting, but it takes superheroes to do that. So, let me make an example. So, like, I think the consequence of what I said before, like, we have some domains in the bank that we know are really big. So, the retail market, KYC, the world of fraud, the contact center. In this domain, we know there is a lot of value. So we try to have like a vision on how this domain will look from here until 2027, sometimes later than that. That sounds easy, but I think it's doable. The hard part is having people, a layer of people, that can decompose that vision into deliverable that build up into that. So, and I think for us, there are a few things that really worked. So the first one is organization-wise, we tried several organizations. I think now we have an analytics organization that mirror the business. Meaning, like if you look at the most senior level of the bank, there is a retail, there is operations, there is wholesale, and we have wholesale banking analytics, operation analytics, and retail analytics. That makes the strategic alignment like one-on-one. We have a vision for wholesale banking, it's about sustainability, then it makes it very easy. There is a consequence for that. We try to organize this around product. So we find these people, we call it product lead, and we think of them as mini CEOs of a domain. So product lead is in charge, for example, of fraud, of lending, and that person is in charge, well, one of delivering, but that's business as usual, but also to provide the vision of how that domain should look like in 3 years, and what are the steps to go there. And when you have this setup, it follows naturally that these people start to understand the business a lot. So they understand the IT ecosystem. So they know upfront how you should build a use case in a way that will be adopted by whatever IT system is there. They know the data of that domain. So they know what makes sense, what not, before they start. And that, I think, it's not really repeatable. So it's not we really have a framework or a template to achieve that. It just we invest a lot in that layer. It's a lot of people from the business. So we think we like having people from the business that come at our side. They learn analytics, we train them. That works as long as they have some quantitative background. And that's, I think, what really changed the time to market for us, organization-wise.
Would you agree?
Yeah, I think I do like the model, which is, you call it 2 in the box, 3 in the box, whatever, but really getting the analytics or the AI, all the expertise into the business, understanding the business domain. So you walk, it's definitely accelerating time to market. You understand where the issues are, you understand what the priorities are, you understand what will have the impact. If there are issues, you can adjust them quite quickly. So when I say embedded model, it's something similar to this, maybe a little bit more direct embedded, but the concept is the same concept, is you align your resources with the business, and then to ensure the scale, you look for those shared services, shared component, etc. Back to how we work with Teresa and team, and with Center of Excellence. Those groups working very much together. But the alignment is very similar.
I'd love to go to questions in the room now before we run out of time. It's going very fast. In the back there first.
Thank you. Hi, Alexandra. Nice to meet you finally.
Nice to meet you too.
My name is Mac, and I run a consulting boutique. By the way, I'm very, I work with all three of you in terms of the banks that you work for. And I had very good experience knowing you all across 3 different geographies. One thing that I'm seeing in the market is people are doing different things. Like one of the consulting company, one of the non-financial services client that I'm working with, they're inventing new business models using AI. So it's not just about reducing cost, but also looking at, can I complement what I'm doing, but creating new products and services which might not necessarily be in the domain that you are expert at. Are you engaged in any such experiences where you're looking at the data of your customers, ultra network individuals, your B2C, and then saying, you know what, I think this is a good product or a company to launch?
Is it directed at anyone in particular? Anyone who wants to take that?
Maybe start, Mike. Thanks for the question. I mean, if you think about what's core, I guess, to all three banks, and certainly to us at Combank, is that how do you serve customers better? And so AI presents amazing opportunities for us to do that in ways that we hadn't thought of previously. Now, some of those have been with our current product set. Good examples might be, bill management capability, where we're able to help customers with their financial well-being. We have many machine learning models already helping customers to understand how their finances unfold and where shocks might happen with bills. But as we become even more kind of capable in terms of being able to rapidly build models based on multiple different types of data coming in a way that is performant in a mobile app, for example, using Edge AI and other things that will help us to do that, we're able to think about new ways to provide value to our customers. We have already provided differential service with utilities providers, things like more telecom. There are green energy deals that we have for our customers with Amber. And AI is helping us to make sure that we're presenting opportunities to the customers who we think would like those the most, and trying to tailor a personalized service to them. Now, that's beyond what a bank would ordinarily have been thought of doing many decades ago. But certainly we see more and more of this opportunity to kind of provide a more well-rounded and a better service to our customers by looking outside what we would have done previously.
Thank you. There's a question here in the front. That's you? Yeah. I think the microphone is coming your way.
Thank you. Very, very informative, really interesting discussion. As a kid in the playground, Top Trumps was like a really popular game for me, and this is because you could compare, a tank with a car, with a fighter jet. When you think about AI use cases, you've got so many different application types, different business lines, different geographic locations, and so on. Do you, in order to sort of think about performance and review of performance, do you have a standardized sort of way of capturing data points and metrics on your use cases?
Yes, we're trying to standardize as much as we can, so we are able to compare and deploy resources where we believe there is the most benefit. But we don't have the concept of, there are two concepts. First, we don't have infinite resources, but also we don't have infinite ideas. So we're definitely trying to optimize all the time. We're trying to assess across three things. First, is the opportunity is big. It can be on client, it can be on efficiency, it can be on any dimension that you want. The second one is, do we have the capabilities in the bank in terms of back to time to market, etc., to actually put it in production in any horizon that you can. We have the ability to invest for the long term. And the third one is back to the business, the analytic leadership, etc. Do you have the right leader to carry it through? Because a lot of those things have a lot of culture change. If you think about the way that you consume videos, I don't know, you use Netflix or whatever else you use, a lot of it is based on recommendation algorithm. A lot of our clients don't use the next trade based on algorithm that was recommended. There is still a lot of voice in the entire spectrum. So there is a big opportunity out there to automate a lot of the processes, to really think through, but the data, the capabilities, the jurisdictions, the controls are very much vast. I think in one of the previous sessions, it was mentioned that humans still involved a lot in the process before your action. So again, the discipline, I'll say, or the mechanism or the framework is across the firm. But how you decide is different, again, based on those parameters.
Yeah, I'll maybe follow up as well. I've been playing a little bit of Top Trumps lately. My nephew has got, I swear he's marked the cards. He gets messy every time. It's unbeatable. One of the things that I would say is, and I mentioned this earlier as well, is that ROI and those frameworks, of course we have them. They're important. We're a very large organization. You need a little bit of structure. But I would encourage people to think about having kind of overarching, unifying purpose, like, say, for example, for us at Combank, it's NPS. And so no matter what area of the business that you're working in, you know that ultimately what you're trying to do is drive a better customer service. You're trying to have them feel better about banking with Combank. Everybody has this. And so culturally, it becomes much easier then for us to kind of overcome some of these siloed things that we have that allow customers to think, allow our people and our staff to think about whether or not a use case is valuable or not. It helps to kind of dispelled some of the complexity in thinking about measuring ROI. And it's another reason why I think we have tilted a little from kind of straight, use case in the line of business, deliver within the business for what the business wants, into more capability and enablement. Because as it becomes easier and easier to deploy AI, you have to worry less and less about balancing the ROI of this use cases versus others. We want thousands. We want all of the people in the bank, regardless of what job they do, to feel as though they're able, because they've seen something that can somehow make a customer's life better, whether it's to make a process easier, or to remove a barrier, or to present a new product. We want them all to be able to do that. And you can't do that easily if you have a very complex sliding scale of what does or does not get to be built.
I think when you run like this type of big organization, you ask yourself what you should standardize and what you should keep like more local. So we are a big global organization. So we have standard portfolio, like it's very clear priorities and things like that. Platform data, you should clearly standardize the approach. But there are things that you want to keep separate. Like for example, we deliver products for wholesale banking, and those are really product for frontline. So they need a UI, the way of working by which they build that needs some type of different skills. And when you actually build a model to give instant lending, it's actually very quantitative business. So there is not a lot of UI, but maybe you have, quite real-time monitoring that you have to set up. So I think for us, there are certain things that you should standardize, but we also operate with this agile methodology, so we keep this tribe. So we also want to keep some tribe specificity. Also, I think if you look at the speed that things going on, standardize also takes time and cost. So yeah, it's not everything you can standardize, I think.
I think we've got time for one more question. So we'll start there, 2 more questions, and then we'll come to you afterwards. And then I have a last question for the panel.
Question to Dan. You mentioned on the first day of COVID, you were able to put together some models on various sectors and all. Question is how much resources you need to have, or what is the cost that you incurred? And is that not a big gamble to put such resources on day one where we do not know how it's going to evolve, right? That's one. And second question is around, so there are some use cases where you don't have the definitive ROI. How do you justify, or how did you put the business case to justify to invest money into those use cases where the ROI is not clear?
Yeah. Great questions. First one I say is it was very, very cheap, actually, to do that. It's one of the things about this sort of kind of general media hysteria about AI and the conflation of that with generative AI and these huge volumes of money that we hear being talked about. I think, I read somewhere the other day, GPT 3.5, the amount of storage, that it took to do that, you could get on like a $10 hard drive, right? It's the compute that was expensive. So what are we doing? Quite easy time series, quite low intensity on compute, very, very easy to do. The answer to your second question is somewhat related to that. So if over time, it's a long time ago that we did that, and we've been doing AI for some considerable time before, if we're able to continue to show and talk about in a very accessible way the value of AI, the value of data, the value of what you can do for customers, you're speaking to a much more receptive audience then about these things where the ROI is perhaps less certain exactly what it will be. There's a degree of trust. And I think that's kind of, we've reached a tipping point insofar as I think now everybody kind of gets the message that the predictive power of models is very, very strong. Won't replace everything, but there is a huge amount of untapped potential. And so building capability is something that's going to pay off in spades in terms of the even better service that we're going to be able to provide to customers in the months and years to come.
We have time for a quick question. We are at time, so a quick question and quick answers.
Super quick one in the context of change management and ROI. So once you have use cases that improve efficiency, how much confidence do you need, and how long do these use cases need to exist in reality that they trickle down to capacity management, resource forecast planning, etc.?
I think reality is that AI doesn't stop. So once you deliver something, If it's something which is valuable enough, you'll need a team that maintains it. You need a team that does AI operation, that does monitoring. So if you're solving a problem which is big enough, as you should, you probably will have teams that take care about that for a while. So that's, I think, a short answer.
Do you have a short answer to that? Okay.
I think one size does not fit all. So you have maturity model. Your question is absolutely correct. We see things that we're transforming. It takes 5 years, sometimes to actually find the right balance between eliminating a function, training people for the next function to have scale. You have to think about the skills upgrade, deployment, different location, different capabilities. So those take years. The one that we've done, which we feel that we just at the beginning, took us 5 years. So it takes many, many years to transform the business. But I'll say that in terms of the objective is always to do it faster, better, cheaper, in control, and you know, to provide those services to the clients. And it does take time. But one thing that we are certain now is that AI accelerating our path.
Dan, do you have a last comment?
Yeah, it depends, is the short answer. But to Marco's point, remember AI is continually learning. So don't feel as though, oh, I've done that and it's created this efficiency. It's in a dynamic ecosystem, particularly in the era of agentic AI, where AIs will talk to other AIs and systems are interrelated. What you do in one area to change the way a workforce works will have a knock-on effect that may then circle back. That's why you need to feel as though you're able to cohesively look at the big picture in a large organization.
So we're going to end here, but we're heading into a session on quantum, which is would be a question we will ask next time we're all gathered, whether your models and frameworks and measurement of success will change when quantum capabilities are there. Maybe they're already there, but we look forward to the next session. But first of all, really want to thank our speakers, Guy, Marco, Dan. Thank you so much for this session.
Thank you.